If someone had told me I'd find her at my friend's wedding, I would have said that part of my life was over. Avery Carter sat at her kitchen table, late morning light, angling through the blinds, striping the glossy envelope resting in her hands. It was heavier than the usual invitation. Thick cardstock with a weight that refused to be tossed aside without consideration. Her thumb followed the curve of the embossed lettering long before she found the courage to break the seal. She already knew who had sent it. The name on the return address alone had been enough to knock the breath from her chest. Jenna Lawson, college roommate. Old friend, and without realizing it, the quiet link between Avery and Hannah Mercer. This was the kind of thing Avery had walked away from years ago. Small-town whispers, reunions, weddings crowded with faces she hadn't seen since her 20s. She'd built something different for herself in Lakeview City. A modest apartment, a career in event photography that kept her moving, flying, always focused on the present, yet never fully rooted in any single place. Her life was comfortable, predictable, safe, or at least it had been until now. She slid a finger under the flap and opened the envelope slowly, like maybe the contents would change if she took her time. You are cordially invited to celebrate the marriage of Jenna Lawson and Tyler Grant. Avery's eyes scanned the elegant script until they landed on the location. September 25th, Cedar Harbor in Northbridge State. Cedar Harbor, the town she hadn't set foot in for 5 years. The place she'd walked away from, leaving behind a tangled mess of emotions and one person she thought she'd never see again. Hannah. The name bloomed in her mind before she could stop it. Hannah with her messy waves of light brown hair, eyes that could go warm or sharp in a heartbeat. Laughter that had once been Avery's favorite sound. They'd been inseparable for 2 years, best friends, partners, lovers, and then with a single decision, Avery had ended it. It hadn't been a fight exactly. More like an unspoken surrender. An offer for a job in Brighton City had come with too much temptation, better pay, creative freedom, a chance to leave the familiar. Hannah had wanted her to stay. Avery had wanted her to come along. Neither had compromised, and the weight of pride had kept them both from asking again. She'd told herself she'd done the right thing, that love couldn't survive the demands of distance and ambition, but sometimes late at night, Avery would find herself scrolling through old photos. Hannah, at the lake, hair damp, grinning at something just out of frame, and the ache would creep back in. Avery set the invitation down on the table, and stared at it. She could say no, she could send a polite excuse about work or travel, let the whole thing pass without reopening old wounds. But Jenna had been a good friend. She'd called Avery in tears when her mother passed, sent her postcards from every trip, never once letting the distance change their bond. Turning down the invitation would feel like a betrayal. And yet, Avery pushed back from the table and stood walking to the window below. The street buzzed with late summer life. Dog walkers, delivery trucks, kids pedaling toward the park. She pressed her fingertips to the glass, feeling the coolness seep into her skin. If Hannah was going to be there, and of course she would be, Avery would have to face her. Not in passing, not from across a crowded room, but in the intimacy of a wedding reception, surrounded by shared friends and half-remembered stories. The thought made her chest tighten. She spent the next 2 days avoiding the RSVP, pretending the envelope had been misplaced. But the longer she waited, the heavier the decision felt, until one quiet Thursday night, she poured herself a glass of wine, sat at her desk, and typed Avery Carter, attending. The drive to Cedar Harbor was long enough to give her time to second-guess every choice she'd ever made. She left before dawn, her camera bag in the back seat. Though she wasn't the hired photographer, old habits made her carry it anyway. The scenery shifted gradually from city blocks to rolling hills and dense green forests. She tried to focus on the road, but memories crept in. Hannah leaning over blueprints at her drafting table. Hannah's hand finding hers under a blanket on the porch. Hannah's voice calling her name across a crowded bar. By the time she pulled up to the Cedar Harbor Inn, Avery's pulse was a steady drumbeat in her ears. The inn was just as she remembered it. White clapboard siding, wrap-around porch, the smell of pine drifting from the trees that framed the property. Inside, the lobby was bustling with guests checking in, carrying garment bags and shoeboxes. Avery signed the guest ledger, collected her key, and tried to avoid scanning the room for a familiar figure. Her suite overlooked the gardens where rows of folding chairs were already set up for the ceremony. She dropped her bag on the bed, sank into the armchair by the window, and told herself she was here for Jenna. That was it. Still, her gaze kept drifting toward the path that wound from the gardens to the parking lot, as though Hannah might appear at any moment. That evening, the rehearsal dinner was a casual affair. A barbecue under string lights behind the inn. Avery arrived late, lingering near the drinks table, camera straps slung over her shoulder like a shield. She chatted with old acquaintances, laughed when she was supposed to, but kept her eyes on the periphery. And then she saw her. Hannah Mercer was across the lawn standing in a cluster of guests, a glass of wine in hand. Her hair was a little shorter now, the soft waves catching the light, and she wore a pale blue dress that made her skin glow in the fading sunset. She was laughing at something someone had said, her head tilted just enough for Avery to remember exactly how it felt to cup her cheek in her palm. Avery froze. 5 years hadn't dimmed the sharpness of recognition, the way her heart seemed to stumble over itself. Hannah turned her head then, scanning the crowd, and their eyes met. It was only a few seconds in which the noise of the party seemed to fade, the air growing heavier between them. Hannah's smile faltered, not disappearing entirely, but shifting into something quieter, more careful. Avery lifted her glass slightly in greeting. Hannah mirrored the gesture, and then someone touched her arm, drawing her attention away. The rest of the evening passed in a haze. They didn't speak, didn't cross the invisible line between them, but Avery felt the pull every time she caught a glimpse of Hannah's silhouette under the lights. When she returned to her room, she stood at the window again, looking out at the darkened gardens. Tomorrow was the wedding. Tomorrow there would be no avoiding her, and for reasons she didn't fully understand yet, Avery wasn't sure if that thought scared her or thrilled her. The morning of the wedding broke clear and bright, the Northbridge State air cool enough to make Avery pull her cardigan tighter as she walked to the dining room for breakfast. The inn smelled faintly of coffee and baked bread, and the murmur of conversation drifted in from the veranda. She spotted Jenna at a corner table surrounded by bridesmaids and well-wishers. Her laughter carrying across the room. Avery waved but didn't intrude. Taking a seat at a small table by the window, she ordered coffee, toast and fruit, trying to focus on the quiet hum of the morning rather than the knot forming in her stomach. Hannah could be anywhere, upstairs getting ready, in the garden, arranging last-minute decorations, or already out of sight entirely. But the awareness of her presence hung in the air, unavoidable. Avery sipped her coffee slowly, eyes on the green sweep of lawn beyond the glass. She was halfway through her toast when a shadow fell across the table. "Mind if I sit?" The voice sent a ripple through her chest before her brain could catch up. She looked up to find Hannah standing there, a small polite smile on her lips. She was dressed casually, dark jeans, a cream sweater, her hair loosely pulled back with a few strands framing her face. Avery swallowed. "Okay." Hannah settled into the chair across from her, setting her coffee cup down between them. For a long moment, neither said anything. It wasn't an empty quiet, but a loaded one, dense with all the words they hadn't spoken in years. "You look good," Hannah said at last, her voice careful but genuine. "You too," Avery answered, surprised by how much she meant it. Hannah gave a small nod, her gaze flicking to the window before returning to Avery's. "I wasn't sure you'd come." "I almost didn't," Avery confessed, "but Jenna's been a good friend, and," she paused, "I guess I thought it was time." Something in Hannah's expression softened, even though her shoulders stayed tense. "Time for what?" Avery held her gaze a heartbeat too long. "To see people again. To see you." A quick flash of emotion, surprise maybe, crossed Hannah's face before she looked away. She took a measured sip of her coffee, as if using the moment to steady herself. After that, they stuck to safe topics. Work. The cities they'd lived in. The ridiculously long Northbridge State winters. Nothing felt forced, but it wasn't exactly comfortable either. Every line of conversation seemed to hang between them, trailing a dozen unsaid questions neither of them was brave enough to chase. After a while, Hannah glanced at her watch and stood. "I should go. I promised Jenna I'd help with some last-minute setup." Avery nodded. "Of course." Hannah paused before turning away. I'll see you at the ceremony. The afternoon arrived in a rush of flowers, music, and hushed voices. Guests in light summer dresses and linen suits filled the white chairs in the garden, the air fragrant with roses and cut grass. Avery took her seat near the aisle, her camera on her lap, even though she wasn't there in any official capacity. Through the small crowd, she caught sight of Hannah across the way. This time, Hannah wasn't in jeans. She wore a deep green dress that clung to her in all the right ways, her hair pulled into a loose knot with tendrils softening the lines of her face. She was talking to someone, her fiancé sir, Avery assumed, and then she saw him, tall, broad-shouldered, neatly dressed. He had the confident ease of someone who belonged, and his hand rested lightly on Hannah's back in a way that felt familiar and possessive all at once. The knot in Avery's stomach tightened. She looked away, focusing on Jenna's entrance, the way the sunlight caught the lace of her gown. The ceremony unfolded in a blur of vows and laughter and applause, and when Jenna and Tyler finally kissed, the crowd erupted in cheers. The reception was held in a tent strung with fairy lights, the long tables draped in white linen, centerpieces of wild flowers spilling from glass jars. The air was warm, humming with conversation and music. Avery found herself at a table with a mix of old friends and a few strangers. She managed polite conversation, but her attention kept drifting toward the dance floor where Hannah and her fiancé moved with easy grace. It wasn't jealousy, not exactly, but something more complicated, a tangle of longing and resignation. Avery reminded herself she had no claim, no right to expect anything after so many years. Still, when Hannah caught her eye across the room, the moment felt like a private thread pulling taut between them. Hannah smiled, small and fleeting, before turning back to her partner. Later, after the cake had been cut, and the first round of toasts had ended, Avery stepped outside for air. The garden was quieter now, the laughter from the tent softened by distance. She wandered down the path toward the edge of the lawn, breathing in the cool night air. Footsteps approached behind her, escaping the crowd. Avery turned to see Hannah standing there, a glass of wine in one hand, her green dress catching the dim glow from the tent. "Just needed a minute," Avery said. "It's a lot in there." Hannah smiled faintly. "Yeah, it is." She hesitated, then joined Avery at the edge of the path, both of them looking out toward the dark silhouette of the trees. For a while they stood in silence. The only sounds were the distant strains of music and the chirp of crickets. "It's strange," Hannah said quietly. "Seeing you here feels like no time has passed, and like a lifetime at the same time." Avery glanced at her. "I know what you mean." Hannah took a slow breath, her gaze fixed on the shadows ahead. "I wasn't sure I could talk to you, but I'm glad I did this morning." "Me too," Avery said, and for once it didn't feel like an empty phrase. Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, something neither of them was ready to name. Not yet. Back in the tent, the band launched into a slow swaying song. Hannah's fiancé appeared, touching her arm lightly. "Dance." Hannah looked at Avery for a heartbeat before nodding to him. "Sure." Avery watched them move away, her chest tightening. She told herself it was fine, that this was the natural order of things. But as she sat back down at her table, she couldn't ignore the truth pressing in at the edges. The past wasn't nearly as far away as she'd thought, and she had no idea what the rest of the night would bring. The clink of glasses and hum of conversation filled the tent, but Avery barely registered any of it. Her gaze kept slipping toward the dance floor where Hannah moved easily in her fiancé's arms. They weren't overly affectionate, no dramatic dips or kisses, but there was a quiet familiarity in their movements that stirred something unsettled in Avery's chest. She forced herself to look away, focusing instead on the camera she'd brought out of habit. She snapped a few candid shots of guests laughing, the soft bouquet of the fairy lights behind them. It was easier to hide behind the lens to observe rather than participate, but the camera didn't block the memories. 5 years earlier, it was autumn in Cedar Harbor, the kind of crisp day that made the air taste like apples and woods. Avery and Hannah had driven out to the lake with a thermos of coffee and a blanket. The leaves were just starting to burn red and gold along the shoreline, and Hannah had insisted on photographing the reflections in the water. Avery had snapped pictures of her instead. Hannah crouched near the edge, her hair caught in the breeze, her concentration fierce and beautiful. "You're supposed to be taking pictures of the lake," Hannah had teased when she noticed. "I am," Avery had said, lowering the camera just enough to grin. "You're part of the scenery." Hannah had rolled her eyes, but couldn't hide the smile. That afternoon, they'd sat side by side on the blanket, sharing coffee and talking about the future. Back then, the future had seemed like something they could shape together, bending it to fit around their plans and desires until the offer came. Until Avery said yes to Brighton City, present day. A burst of applause from the dance floor jolted Avery back to the present. The song had ended, and the crowd was shifting toward the bar and dessert tables. She spotted Hannah slipping away from her fiancé, heading toward a group of old friends. Avery busied herself with her camera again, but the familiar ache lingered. She told herself it was nostalgia, nothing more, like flipping through an old album and remembering who you used to be. But deep down, she knew it was more complicated. 4 years earlier, the night before Avery left for Brighton City had been a strange mix of tenderness and tension. They'd sat on Hannah's porch, the air heavy with the scent of rain, both of them knowing this was goodbye, but refusing to say it outright. "You could still come with me," Avery had said softly, breaking the silence. Hannah shook her head. "My life is here, my work, my family. I can't just walk away from it." Avery's heart had clenched. "So you want me to walk away from mine?" Hannah had looked at her for a long time, her expression caught somewhere between love and frustration. "I want you to choose us." Avery hadn't answered, and when she finally left the next morning, they didn't kiss goodbye. Present day. By the time dessert was served, Avery had decided she needed a break from the noise. She slipped out through the side of the tent into the cool night, the grass damp beneath her heels. The garden was quiet, except for the distant murmur of music. She followed the path past the rose bushes, until she reached the gazebo at the far end. Inside, a single string of fairy lights glowed faintly. She was about to turn back when she heard footsteps behind her. "Seems like we keep finding each other out here," Hannah said, appearing at the edge of the light. Avery smiled faintly. "Maybe we're both just bad at crowds." Hannah stepped closer, her heels clicking softly on the wood. "Or maybe we're avoiding the same thing." Avery raised an eyebrow. "And what's that?" Hannah hesitated, her eyes searching Avery's face. "I don't know, maybe the part where this feels strange. Familiar, but strange." Avery leaned against the railing, the cool wood at her back. "It's been a long time." 5 years, Hannah said, almost to herself. They fell silent again, the air between them heavy with unspoken things. 3 years earlier, Avery had returned to Cedar Harbor once before, briefly for Jenna's birthday. She and Hannah had exchanged polite hellos, a quick hug, and then spent the night avoiding each other's gaze. Avery had left early, driving back to the city in the dark, the taste of regret bitter in her mouth. She'd told herself afterward it was for the best. No reopening old wounds, no lingering what-ifs. Present day. "Do you ever think about it?" Hannah asked suddenly. Avery's chest tightened. "About what?" Hannah's eyes met hers. Avery's breath caught, but she kept her tone even. "Sometimes," Hannah nodded slowly, as if she'd expected that answer. "I do too." She glanced toward the tent where the music had shifted to another slow song. "It's funny, I thought I'd moved on, and I have mostly, but being here seeing you," she broke off, shaking her head. "It's different." Avery wanted to ask what she meant, but the moment was fragile, and pushing might break it. Hannah stepped back, her hand brushing the railing. "I should get back." "Yeah," Avery said softly, but neither of them moved for a few seconds longer than necessary. Avery returned to the tent a few minutes after Hannah, slipping into her seat as though nothing had happened. But inside, something had shifted, subtle but undeniable. The past wasn't just echoing anymore, it was knocking. The reception was in full swing when Avery returned to the tent. The band had shifted to upbeat songs, the dance floor crowded with guests twirling and laughing under the fairy lights. She settled back into her chair, making herself participate in the conversation at the table, but her attention kept drifting to where Hannah stood by the bar with her fiancé. He leaned down to murmur something against her ear, and Hannah gave him a smile. Too careful, Avery thought. The kind of polite smile you wore when you were expected to be charming. It wasn't the open, easy grin Avery remembered from years ago. She lifted her champagne, reminding herself it wasn't her concern. Whatever Hannah's life looked like now, Avery no longer had a place in it. Still, when the band's lead singer announced they were slowing things down, Avery's pulse stumbled. A smooth, soulful melody floated into the room, and couples moved toward the dance floor, bodies swaying in time with the music. Avery saw Hannah pause when her fiancé invited her to dance. For a heartbeat, Hannah's eyes darted across the room, landing on Avery. Then, to Avery's surprise, she shook her head. She said something Avery couldn't catch, and he gave a brief nod before drifting toward another group. Before Avery could work out what was happening, Hannah was walking across the room toward her. "Dance with me," she said. It wasn't an offer. Avery's mouth went dry. "Hannah, please." The word was soft but firm, and Avery was on her feet before she'd fully chosen to move. Hannah's hand was warm in hers, as she guided her into the center of the dance floor, the rest of the guests fading into a blur of color and motion. When Hannah's arm slipped around Avery's shoulder, it felt like stepping straight back into an old memory. The scent of her hair, faintly floral, familiar, brought back late nights on porches, slow walks home from the lake, lazy Sunday mornings when they danced barefoot in the kitchen. They moved slowly, swaying to the music. "This is probably a bad idea," Avery murmured. Hannah's lips curved, though her voice was steady. "Probably," but neither of them let go. Avery searched Hannah's face, the way her eyes softened in the low light, the faint furrow in her brow, like she was holding something back. "Why now?" Avery asked quietly. Hannah's gaze flicked down for a moment before returning to hers. "Because I can't pretend anymore. Not tonight. Not with you here." The words settled between them like an unspoken challenge. Avery's hand tightened slightly on Hannah's waist. "You're engaged." "I know," Hannah said, her voice almost a whisper. "And it's fine. He's fine. My life is fine," she swallowed. "But fine isn't the same as happy." Avery's chest constricted. She wanted to say something, wanted to tell Hannah she'd thought of her every day, that no one had ever come close. But the weight of the setting, the people around them, kept her from spilling everything. The song carried them through the silence. Avery could feel the press of Hannah's palm against her back, the subtle draw of her closer. Their eyes met, and whatever resolve had kept them apart over the years began to fray. When the bridge of the song swelled, Hannah's hand slid up to cup Avery's cheek. For a moment they just stood there, the music fading into the background, the rest of the room falling away. Then Hannah leaned in. The kiss was not tentative, it was inevitable, warm, certain, full of all the things they'd never said. It was years of absence and months of wandering compressed into a few breathless seconds. Avery's heart thudded so loudly, she was sure Hannah could feel it. She kissed her back without hesitation, her hand curling into the fabric of Hannah's dress, as if to keep her anchored. When they finally pulled apart, the air between them felt different, charged alive. Hannah exhaled shakily. "God, I shouldn't have." "Don't," Avery interrupted softly. "Don't say you regret it." Hannah searched her face, something unsteady flickering in her eyes. "I don't." The music shifted to a faster beat, and reality seemed to press in on them. Hannah stepped back, her hand lingering for a fraction of a second before falling away. "I need to think," she said, her voice low. Avery nodded, though her pulse was still racing. "Take your time." Hannah gave a faint, almost apologetic smile, before turning and disappearing into the crowd. Avery returned to her table, the taste of the kiss still fresh, the echo of Hannah's touch on her skin. The rest of the reception blurred, laughter, more dancing, speeches she barely heard. When she finally slipped away to her room, she stood in the dark for a long time, leaning against the door. Outside, the sounds of the party drifted faintly through the night air. She didn't know what Hannah would decide, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty. The past they'd been avoiding was no longer behind them. It was here. Avery barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she replayed the dance, the kiss, the way Hannah had looked at her in those suspended seconds before reality pushed back in. She tried to imagine what Hannah was thinking now, whether she was regretting it, replaying it too, or burying it under the safe predictability of her engagement. When morning came, Avery dragged herself out of bed and into the shower, hoping the steam would clear her head. It didn't. By the time she stepped into the inn's dining room for breakfast,
Most of the wedding guests were already there, scattered among tables with plates of pancakes and scrambled eggs. Avery scanned the room automatically. No Hannah, she told herself that was fine. Maybe Hannah was sleeping in, or having breakfast somewhere else. Maybe she was avoiding her. Avery sat alone at a small table by the window, and sipped her coffee. She thought about last night, the heat of Hannah's hand on her waist, the way she'd said, "I don't," when Avery warned her not to claim regret. The words had felt like a door cracking open, but a door could close just as quickly. Halfway through her toast, Jenna appeared, radiant even in jeans and a t-shirt. "Hey, you survived the reception," she teased, pulling up a chair. Avery smiled faintly. "Barely. Did you have a good time?" Jenna asked, pouring herself coffee. Avery hesitated. It was memorable. Jenna's gaze sharpened for a fraction of a second, but she didn't press. They talked about safe topics, the ceremony, the music, the food, until Jenna was called away by another guest. When Avery glanced up again, she caught sight of Hannah at the far end of the dining room. She was dressed casually, hair pulled into a messy bun, and she wasn't alone. Her fiancé was with her, leaning in to speak softly as they moved toward the door. Hannah didn't look in Avery's direction, not once. Avery tried not to dwell on it, but the avoidance became impossible to ignore as the day went on. There was a farewell brunch, a casual gathering in the gardens, and through all of it, Hannah kept her distance. She chatted with mutual friends, posed for photos, laughed at jokes Avery couldn't hear, and every time their paths almost crossed, Hannah found a reason to pivot away. It was deliberate. Avery kept her own mask in place, smiling, engaging, making it look like she wasn't scanning every corner of the inn for a glimpse of Hannah alone. That evening, when most guests had left for home, Avery wandered down to the lake shore. The air was still, the surface of the water reflecting the deepening blue of twilight. She sat on a weathered bench, elbows on her knees, trying to make sense of the mess in her chest. She told herself she came here for Jenna, that seeing Hannah would just be a footnote. But the truth was sharper now. She'd wanted to see her. She'd wanted to know if what they'd had was still there. And the kiss had answered that. The problem was Hannah seemed determined to pretend it hadn't happened. Footsteps crunched on the gravel behind her. For a hopeful second, Avery thought it might be Hannah, but it was one of Jenna's cousins out for a walk who greeted her and kept moving. Avery stayed until the stars began to appear, then headed back to the inn. She told herself she'd give it one more day. If Hannah wanted to talk, she'd find her. If not, Avery would leave. The next morning came and went without so much as a glance from Hannah. She and her fiancé left together after breakfast, waving to a group of friends before getting into his car. Avery watched from the veranda, hidden behind a post. Hannah didn't look back. That night, Avery sat on the edge of her bed, scrolling aimlessly through her phone. Every so often, she'd catch herself staring at the blank text field, her fingers itching to type, "We need to talk," but she didn't. She told herself it wasn't fair to send that kind of message when Hannah was still engaged, still living in a world that didn't include her. And yet, when she finally turned off the light, Avery knew this wasn't over. Not for her. Avery was packing when the knock came. It was late afternoon. Her suitcase half sipped on the bed, the last of her camera gear already stowed away. She'd decided to leave earlier than planned, driving back to Lakeview City before nightfall. It wasn't an impulsive choice so much as an escape, an attempt to outrun the tight knot of uncertainty lodged in her chest since the kiss. The knock came again, firmer this time. She crossed the room, opened the door and froze. Hannah stood there. Her hair was down, falling in loose waves around her face, and she wore a simple black sweater and jeans. No trace of wedding finery, no fiancé hovering in the background. Her expression was serious, almost wary. "Can we talk?" she asked. Avery stepped aside wordlessly, letting her in. Hannah moved to the middle of the room, her gaze flicking to the open suitcase before returning to Avery.
"You're leaving," Hannah said. Avery nodded. "I figured it was time." Hannah's hands were shoved into her pockets. "Time to avoid me, you mean?" Avery's brow lifted slightly. "Avoid you? You've been the one dodging me for 2 days." Hannah looked away, her jaw tightening. "I didn't know what to say." You could have started with hello, Avery said, her voice gentler than her words. Silence settled between them, thick and heavy. Avery sat on the edge of the bed, resting her forearms on her knees. You kissed me, Hannah, and then you disappeared. What am I supposed to do with that? Hannah exhaled slowly. I panicked. I didn't expect to feel. She trailed off, struggling for the right words. I thought I'd buried everything. I thought what we had was over, and I was fine with that. And then the dance. Avery finished. Hannah nodded. The dance. Avery kept her eyes on her. So what now? You're engaged. You have a life. I'm not here to blow it up. I know, Hannah said quietly. And that's why I had to think before I said anything else to you. I'm not going to stand here and pretend my choices don't affect other people. But I also can't lie and say seeing you didn't change something. Avery's chest tightened. Change what? Hannah's gaze dropped to the floor. I've been going through the motions for months, maybe longer. My fiancé is a good man. Safe, steady, but being with him doesn't feel the way being with you did. It never has. Avery didn't move, didn't speak, just let the words hang in the air. Hannah stepped closer, her voice steady but low. You were the only person I ever loved without holding anything back, and when you left, I told myself I'd never let anyone have that much of me again. Maybe that's why this engagement feels easier, because it's not the same risk. Avery's throat felt tight. I never stopped thinking about you, she admitted. Even when I convinced myself it was better we stayed apart. I kept wondering what would have happened if I'd asked one more time for you to come with me, or if I'd stayed. Hannah's lips curved in a faint bittersweet smile. I used to imagine it too, but then I'd remind myself that if you'd wanted to stay, you would have. The quiet stretched between them again, but it wasn't the same as before. There was a rawness now, the unvarnished truth they'd both been avoiding. Avery stood, closing the small distance between them. I left because I thought you wouldn't follow, and I couldn't ask you to give up what you had here. I thought I was protecting us. Turns out I was just ending us. Hannah's eyes met hers unflinching. Maybe we both were. They stood there for a moment, the hum of the heater filling the space. So what happens next? Avery asked. Hannah shook her head slightly. I don't know. I can't give you an answer today. I need to be honest with myself before I can be honest with anyone else. Avery nodded slowly. Fair enough, but I can't. She stopped, searching for the right words. I can't sit around waiting for something that might never happen. If you decide you want this, want us, you'll have to tell me. Hannah's expression softened. I wouldn't expect you to wait, but I hope you know. Last night wasn't a mistake. Avery felt something ease inside her. Just a little. Good because it didn't feel like one. Hannah glanced at the door, her body language shifting like she was about to leave. I should go. I have a lot to figure out. Avery walked her to the door. Take care of yourself, Hannah. Hannah hesitated in the doorway, her hand resting lightly on the frame. You too, Avery. And then she was gone, the sound of her footsteps fading down the hall. Avery stood there for a long moment before closing the door. The room felt emptier than it had minutes ago, but her mind was buzzing. She didn't know what Hannah would choose, but at least now they'd stopped pretending. She sat back on the bed, staring at the half-packed suitcase. For the first time all weekend, leaving didn't feel like the only option. Avery didn't zip the suitcase. She left it open on the bed like a question. She refused to answer. After Hannah walked out, the room felt too quiet. No music from the lawn, no voices in the hallway, just the muted thrum of the heater and the small clicks of the cooling pipes. She sat at the little desk beneath the window, and opened her laptop, the screen's glow catching the ghost of her own reflection. Flights, routes, hotel points. She pulled them up out of habit, not intention. Every plan she sketched came apart the moment she pictured Hannah's face at the door. She shut the laptop and breathed out slowly. She could leave. It would be the cleaner choice, but something in her, stubborn and hopeful and inconvenient, asked her to wait one more night, not to press, not to hover, just to be here, in case the truth they'd finally said out loud still needed somewhere to land. Across town, Hannah drove with both hands locked on the wheel, the wipers smearing a fine mist left by an early evening drizzle. Her fiancé, Ethan, lived in a new complex with tidy hedges and wide, bright hallways that always smelled faintly of lemon cleaner. She'd chosen the place with him months ago, nodding through the tour of amenities and picturing a life that looked good from a distance. Gym at dawn, dinners at the little Italian place downstairs, shared calendars, shared accounts, shared holidays, safety wrapped in routine. She pulled into the lot and killed the engine, letting the quiet fall heavy. The confusion that had knotted her stomach for days split into two clean lines, what she owed and what she wanted. She sat with both until the cold crept through her coat and made the decision for her. Go inside. Don't stall. Ethan opened the door before she could knock. His tie loosened, sleeves rolled. Hey, he said, smiling easily. I was about to text, you hungry? Hannah stepped in, the familiar neatness of the place sweeping over her. Everything had a place. Everything was in it. Not really, she said. She shrugged off her coat and hung it on the hook he'd installed because the entry bench looked cluttered without it. He watched her for a beat longer than usual, then motioned toward the couch. They sat. A sports recap murmured on mute from the TV, figures sliding across a screen that none of them watched. Ethan turned to her, his brow softening. You've been quiet since the wedding, he said. Is everything okay? She'd rehearsed versions of this conversation in her head. Gentle openings, hedged truths, a soft landing. But Avery's voice from the afternoon threaded through all of it. If you decide you want this, want us, you'll have to tell me. Something inside Hannah refused to look away from that candor. I'm not okay, she said, and I don't want to pretend I am. Ethan's posture shifted, a slow straightening. All right, he said carefully. Talk to me. Hannah folded her hands, unspooled them, folded them again. I've been going along with the plans, with the venue, with the lists. It all made sense. It still does on paper. But I've had this feeling for a while, that I can't shake. Like I'm performing the life I'm supposed to want, not the one I actually want. She drew a breath. Seeing people from home stirred a lot up. People, he repeated. It wasn't suspicious exactly, but a line of alertness drew across his face. An old friend, she said steady. Someone I used to be with. It made me realize that the distance I've been putting between us, between me and all of this, didn't begin last week. I've been naming it busyness, stress, bad timing. She met his eyes without looking away. But it's doubt. He let out a long measured breath, thumb dragging along his jaw the way he always did when he was searching for the right words. Is this about that friend? He asked. Or is this about us? Both, she replied. Saying it felt like both a release and a wound. Seeing her again meant she couldn't pretend anymore. But the lie hadn't really been about her. It was about whether she was the kind of person who agreed to a safe life and then tried to rename it joy. Ethan leaned back, studying her face. The hurt in his eyes was unmistakable, and she felt the weight of it land. Did you cheat on me? He asked. Every syllable deliberate, controlled. Hannah's throat went tight. I kissed her, she said. Once I'm not going to soften it. She held his gaze, letting the honesty burn. It was wrong. I'm sorry. He closed his eyes for a moment, his jaw tensing. When he looked at her again, the easy warmth was gone, replaced by a calm, somber clarity. Thank you for telling me, he said. I wish you'd told me before the kiss. I wish a lot of things. His voice wasn't accusing, just taking stock. So what are you saying now? I'm saying I can't marry you like this. The quiet in the room seemed to expand, pressing in around them. You deserve someone who's certain, and I deserve to stop pretending. If I stay because it's easier, we both lose. His gaze dropped to the coffee table, as if the wood grain might hold an answer. Do you love her? He asked. Hannah felt the truth rise up, uncomplicated, unmerciful. I never stopped, she said. I tried to. I built a life that didn't have her in it. I wanted it to be enough. It isn't. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The game on mute cycled highlights, as if time were a loop. Ethan finally nodded. The kind of nod you give when a verdict is both devastating and unsurprising. I think I knew something was off, he said. You're present,
but it's like part of you is protecting a space I can't get into. He looked up, and she saw the good man she'd named. Decent, steady, unwilling to make a home out of self-deception. I don't want to talk you into anything. I'm not that guy. I never thought you were, she said softly. He stood, walked to the kitchen, came back with a glass of water. He set it down between them, as if it were a truce. Well, figure out the logistics, he said. Deposits, invitations. I'll talk to my parents. You talk to yours. We make this as kind as we can. Tears stung her eyes, not of regret, but of gratitude for the way endings could still hold dignity. Thank you, she said. I am sorry. I know. He managed a small weary smile. Do me one favor. Anything. Don't waste this clarity, he said. If you're going to blow up your life, at least make it the right explosion. A laugh cracked through her tears, unexpected and real. Deal. They divided the immediate tasks the way they'd divided chores, with lists and bullet points and levity where it would fit. And though her chest itched, Hannah felt something she hadn't felt in months. Breath moving easily in her lungs. When she left, the air outside was colder, the drizzle deepening into a fine rain that slicked the sidewalks and silvered the street lights. She drove on instinct, the road to the Cedar Harbor in a line she knew by muscle memory and hope. Back in her room, Avery pulled her suitcase off the bed and slid it under the luggage rack. If she was waiting, she might as well stop pretending she wasn't. She changed into a sweatshirt and sat cross-legged on the carpet by the window. Phone on the sill, lights off, the garden below drawn in ink and shadow. She thought about the conversation with Hannah, how neither of them had tried to turn the past into a myth or the present into a shortcut. She thought about the first time she'd realized she loved Hannah. A Saturday in late fall, when they'd fixed a wobbly table together, and then ate grilled cheese on the floor. The whole apartment smelling like butter and possibility. Ordinary tenderness. That was the kind of love she trusted. Her phone buzzed. For a second she didn't move, letting the sound exist by itself. Then she reached for it, thumb unsteady. From Hannah. Are you awake? Avery typed, erased, typed again. Avery, yes. The typing bubble appeared, vanished, returned. When the message arrived, Avery exhaled a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Hannah, I told Ethan the truth. We're not getting married. Avery's heartbeat, tripped, righted, tripped again. She read the sentence twice, then once more. Not because she doubted it, but because the world had shifted on its axis and needed time to settle. Her fingers hovered. She chose care over celebration. Avery, thank you for telling me. Are you okay? A longer pause then. Hannah, sad, relieved, scared, clear. Avery felt the shape of those words float across the room and take a seat. She typed, Avery, do you want to talk now or tomorrow? Hannah replied almost immediately. Hannah, tomorrow morning. I want to do this awake. No more fugitive decisions in doorways. Avery smiled. The image too precise not to laugh at. Avery, the Gaggies, Bow the Gardens. 9. Hannah, 9. Thank you for not pushing. Avery, thank you for being honest. They sat in the quiet of their separate rooms, phone still, night deepening. Avery lay back on the carpet and watched the faint reflection of the garden lights move across the ceiling as the wind stirred the branches. She let herself imagine exactly one thing. Hannah walking down the path in morning light, hair pulled into a simple knot, that crease between her brows, that appeared when she was bracing to be brave. A scene so small and complete, it could hold the weight of a life. Hannah didn't sleep. She drafted emails to vendors she and Ethan had paid deposits to, then deleted them, deciding the messages could wait a day. She texted Jenna, can we talk tomorrow, and got an immediate, of course. Proud of you. She opened her parents' contact and closed it again. That conversation would be its own weather system. Near midnight, she padded into her kitchen and made tea she wouldn't drink. At the counter, she caught her reflection in the dark window. A woman who had chosen the harder road, the one with fewer instructions and no guarantees. Fear pulsed. Under it, a steadier current. Relief. In the morning she would say hard things to the people she loved. In the morning she would walk to the gazebo and face the person she had never stopped loving. Tonight she would allow herself to stand in the hallway of those two rooms, looking from one doorway to the other, and understand that the only way through was forward. Avery woke before her alarm, the room slate grey with pre-dawn. She made coffee with the tiny in-room machine that always tasted faintly of cardboard, and still felt like a gift. She showered, pulled on a sweater the color of storm clouds, and slid her camera strap over one shoulder out of muscle memory rather than plan. If there was one thing she knew how to do, it was to meet a moment with eyes open. At 8:45, she was on the path, decollecting at the cuffs of her jeans, breath visible as a pale ribbon in the cool air. The gazebo rose ahead, white and simple, a circle of quiet at the edge of the lawn. She stepped inside and rested her palms on the railing, looking out at the lake. The surface was a sheet of pewter, unbroken. Behind her, footsteps on wood. She turned. Hannah stood at the entrance, hair pulled back, a navy coat belted at the waist, face bare of anything that could be mistaken for armor. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. Then Hannah crossed the small distance, and Avery saw it up close. The fatigue, the steadiness, the unmistakable rightness of a thing aligned at last. "Hi," Hannah said, the words soft with newness and history both. "Hi," Avery answered, and felt the chapter turn like a page that had been waiting under her hand. The morning light poured through the slats of the gazebo, pale gold against the cool air. Avery's breath fogged in front of her, as she watched Hannah step closer, each footfall deliberate. It felt like they were meeting at the center of a bridge. Two people who had once stood here as different versions of themselves, now arriving again. Older, maybe wiser, definitely changed. For a moment, they just looked at each other. No rush, no interruptions. Hannah's hands were tucked into the pockets of her coat, but Avery could see the faint tremor in her shoulders, the way her jaw tightened before she spoke. "I told Ethan everything last night, all of it, not just the kiss about us, about how I've never really stopped." She hesitated, then finished. "Loving you." Avery felt the words land like something solid, something you could hold in your hands. She didn't move closer yet. She let the silence honor them. "That's not easy to say," she replied softly. "It's harder to live a lie," Hannah said, her gaze unwavering. "I've been doing that for a while. I thought safety was enough. I thought maybe love could grow from it, but it's not the same as what we had, what we still have." Avery's heart pounded, but she kept her voice steady. "Are you sure this isn't just about nostalgia? About me showing up, and making you remember the good parts?" Hannah shook her head immediately. "No, this isn't about chasing a memory. It's about realizing that the best parts of me were always the ones I was with you. And I want to see who we can be now, not who we were at 27. Avery stepped forward then, closing part of the distance. "We heard each other before, Hannah. We didn't know how to bend without breaking. If we do this again, I need to know we're not repeating the same mistakes." Hannah's lips curved, not quite a smile, but something close. "I don't want the same story twice. I want the sequel we were too scared to write." That broke something open in Avery. She reached up, brushing a strand of hair back from Hannah's face, her fingers lingering against her cheek. "I never stopped loving you either, even when I tried to convince myself I had." Hannah's eyes softened, the faint crease between her brows easing. "Then maybe we stopped convincing ourselves of anything except the truth that we're better together than apart." Avery let out a shaky laugh. "God, you make it sound so simple." "It's not," Hannah admitted. "It's going to be messy and awkward, and we'll have to relearn each other, but I'd rather do that than spend another 5 years wondering what if." They stood there for a moment, the weight of the choice settling between them. Not heavy in a way that crushed, but in a way that grounded. Avery stepped in fully now, her arms sliding around Hannah's waist. "No more running." Hannah wrapped her arms around her in return, the warmth of her body cutting through the cool air. "No more running," she promised. The kiss this time was slower, less desperate than the one on the dance floor. It was a promise, not a question. Deep, certain, the kind that says, "We know the cost, and we're still all in." When they finally pulled apart, Hannah rested her forehead against Avery's. "Come home with me, not forever, just for now." Let's figure this out in the daylight. Avery smiled. You have no idea how much I've wanted to hear you say that. They walked back toward the inn side by side, the path crunching softly under their shoes. Neither of them said much, but the quiet was different now, full instead of empty. By the time they reached the veranda, the breakfast rush had cleared. A few guests lingered over coffee, but no one paid them much attention. Avery felt a strange lightness in her chest, like she'd been carrying a weight so long she'd forgotten what it felt like to set it down. Inside, they stopped near the staircase. I need to grab my bag, Avery said. Give me 10 minutes. Hannah's lips quirked. I'll be in the lobby. Try not to overpack. We're only going 10 minutes down the road. Avery chuckled, watching her walk away before heading upstairs. In her room she moved quickly, tossing her things into her suitcase without the same heaviness that had weighed on her just 2 days ago. The open suitcase no longer felt like an escape. It felt like a beginning. When she came back down, Hannah was waiting by the door, hands wrapped around a paper cup of coffee. She handed it to Avery. Figured you could use this. Avery took a sip, smiling over the rim. Perfect. They stepped outside together, the crisp air hitting them with the sharp promise of autumn. Avery glanced at Hannah, catching the small, almost shy smile playing at her lips, and felt a pulse of something steady and strong move through her. It wasn't certainty, not the kind that comes from guarantees. It was the certainty of choosing anyway. That afternoon, they sat in Hannah's kitchen, with mugs of tea, sunlight spilling across the table. They talked not about wedding deposits or guest lists, not about every wound from the past, but about what they wanted now, what they feared, where they were willing to bend this time. And as the hours slipped by, neither of them noticed the tea growing cold. For the first time in 5 years, the future didn't feel like something they had to compromise into submission. It felt like something they could build. Messy, imperfect, theirs. 3 months later, the first snow-dusted Lakeview city in a film of white that made everything look quieter than it was. From Avery's apartment window, the street lamps turned the flurries into a slow, steady curtain. Inside, the radiator hissed, the kettle clicked off, and the faint thump of music from the upstairs neighbor kept time with the city's hum. Hannah let herself in with the key. Avery had given her 2 weeks earlier. Not a contract, Avery had said, pressing the brass into her palm. Just an invitation. She stamped the slush from her boots, cheeks flushed from the cold, and held up a paper bag like a trophy. Emergency sourdough and tomato soup, she announced. I come bearing carbs. Avery grinned from behind her laptop. She was culling a corporate goal. Wide shots, clinking glasses, too many uplights. You're a public servant. I'm an architect who knows when a building, human or otherwise, needs reinforcement, Hannah said, shrugging out of her coat. How's the edit? Long. Avery closed the laptop halfway, a promise to return. But better now. They moved around each other in a rhythm that was new and already familiar. Hannah poured soup into a pot. Avery set bowls on the counter. When they touched, elbows, shoulders, the brush of a hand, it felt less like an accident, and more like punctuation. What time is therapy tomorrow? Hannah asked, stirring. They'd started seeing a couples counselor once a month, not because they were falling apart, but because they wanted not to. The first session had been awkward, the second less so. Naming old habits turned out to be the fastest way to interrupt them. 10. Avery said, do you want to go together from here? Yeah. Hannah hesitated. And afterward we can call my parents. I think they're ready to stop pretending the postponement is still a postponement. Avery leaned against the counter. You sure you want me on that call? She asked. I'm sure I don't want to keep you a secret, Hannah replied, shooting her a crooked smile. Besides, my mother will be on her best behavior, if there's a witness. They ate at the small bistro table by the window. The soup warmed their faces as the city outside grew softer under the falling snow. Across the street, a couple bickered good-naturedly, while wrestling a Christmas tree up a stairwell clearly designed for nothing bigger than a laundry basket. Hannah laughed, low and unhurried. Remember when we almost bought that tree at the roadside lot, near Cedar Harbor? The one with the crooked top. We didn't buy it, Avery said. We spent 40 minutes talking about buying it, then remembered we didn't own any lights, or minor detail, a stand. We were very young, Hannah said. Terrible planners. We're excellent planners now, Avery countered. We have calendars, and a working understanding of gravity, and therapy, Hannah added, tapping her spoon against the bowl. That helps. They drifted into an easy silence. When the bowls were empty, Hannah carried them to the sink to wash, while Avery dried, flicking tiny droplets of water onto Hannah's forearm just to earn an eye roll. The simplicity of it wrapped around them, the clink of dishes, the soft thud of cabinet doors, the small domestic music of home. Later they curled up on the couch, feet tucked under a shared blanket, laptops propped open like matching bookends. Avery culled another folder, eyes sharp, clicking through images with the swift practiced motion of a professional. Hannah scrolled through a digital model of a library renovation, jotting notes for an upcoming meeting with the city. Every so often, they traded offhand remarks like postcards. Whoever lit this ballroom hates skin tones, Avery said. Whoever designed this mezzanine hates human circulation, Hannah replied. Maybe they should date, Avery said. Hannah snorted. A buzz on the coffee table nudged the moment aside. Hannah's phone. She glanced at the screen, then over at Avery. Ethan. They didn't flinch at his name anymore. The first time he'd reached out after the breakup, Hannah had read the message aloud with trembling hands. It had been generous. It had also knocked her flat for a day. Now, when his name appeared, it felt more like weather, something to register and plan around, not something to fear. She opened the text. Got the last refund from the venue. Sending your share tomorrow. Hope you're well. No need to reply. Hannah let out a slow breath. He's done with the logistics, she said. I mean, do you want to reply anyway? Avery asked. Hannah stared at the phone a beat, then typed. Thank you, wishing you well too. She hit send and placed the phone face down. He deserved a life not built on my ambivalence, she said. I'm glad he'll have that. Avery rubbed her thumb along the inside of Hannah's wrist. So do you. They put the laptops away earlier than planned. The upstairs music shifted to a slow old soul track. Avery cocked an eyebrow at the ceiling. Our neighbor knows what we need. Hannah stood and held out a hand. Then we shouldn't be rude. They made a small dance floor between couch and coffee table. No gown, no fairy lights, no audience. Just two women and a song that had nothing to prove. Hannah set her palm on Avery's shoulder. Avery's hand found Hannah's waist. They swayed and the room's edges blurred into a warm, forgiving smear. This is the dance we owed ourselves, Hannah said, smiling against Avery's temple. No panic exit, this time, Avery said. No exits, Hannah agreed. Just doors we're choosing together. When the song ended, they didn't step away. Snow kept falling. The radiator kept humming. Time kept doing its job without hurrying them along. The next morning, the counselor's office smelled like eucalyptus and paper. They sat on the couch, knees angled toward each other, and tried to describe, not the kiss at the wedding or the breakup fallout, but the quieter work since the morning checks when one of them grew quiet. The rule about not arguing, after 11 p.m. the apology, that had to include a plan. The counselor nodded, asked for specifics, steered them from performance to precision. What do you fear most right now? She asked, toward the end. Repeating our old distance, Avery said without needing to think. Choosing work over us and calling it ambition. Losing myself inside the relationship, Hannah said. Shrinking to fit someone else's shape. And what do you want? The counselor asked. Both, Avery said. The work and the US, not at war. Both, Hannah echoed. A love that doesn't require amnesia. On the walk back to the train, the city bright and brittle around them, Avery slipped her gloved hand into Hannah's. We sounded like people who know what they're talking about. We sounded like people who are learning not to lie to themselves, Hannah said. I like those people. Back at the apartment, Avery set up a small backdrop by the window and pulled out her tripod. Stand there, she said. Hannah laughed. Oh no, is this for your gallery, or for our future grandchildren? Both. Avery framed the shot. Tilt your chin. Less more. Okay, stop, that's it. Hannah rolled her eyes and complied, but the look she gave the lens wasn't posed. It was steady, present. When the shutter clicked, Avery felt something small and definitive slip into place, like the last tile in a pattern you can finally see. That evening, they FaceTimed Hannah's parents from the couch. It was not a storm. It was not a celebration. It was a conversation. There were sigh and silences and 2 attempts at changing the subject. There was also a moment where Hannah's mother said quietly, "I want you to be happy, not brave." And Hannah said, "I'm trying to be both." And nobody looked away. When the call ended, Hannah leaned into Avery's shoulder and let out a breath that seemed to empty the year. "You did great," Avery said. "We did," Hannah said. "I didn't hide." "Neither did I," Avery said. They ate takeout on the floor, because the table was covered in sample prints, and a stack of sticky notes labeled with impossible deadlines. At some point, Avery reached for a pen and wrote a single line on the top note, then stuck it to the fridge. "Choose each other early. Choose each other often." Hannah read it, and nodded. "Put that in the rule book," she said. "It is the rule book," Avery said. Before bed, they stood at the window, lights off. The city, a glittering map of choices outside. Avery rested her chin on Hannah's shoulder. "Want to go to Northbridge State in the spring?" she asked. "Not for a wedding, just to see what the lake looks like now." "I do," Hannah said. "We can buy a tree this time. Off-season chaos is kind of our thing." Avery smiled. "I'll pack lights and a stand." They turned away from the window, from the city, from the version of their lives that had depended on so much careful pretending.
The apartment was warm. The bed was messy. Tomorrow would still bring deadlines, a meeting, a phone call that might sting. It would also bring coffee, a post-it on the fridge, and a kitchen dance if the upstairs neighbor cooperated. They slipped beneath the covers and reached for each other with the kind of easy, unremarkable familiarity that makes a place a home. As Avery's breathing steadied and Hannah's fingers found hers in the dark, the quiet didn't feel like a lack of noise. It felt like the presence of an answer they had finally learned how to give. No grand gesture, no dramatic curtain call, just the ongoing practice of love, small, everyday, chosen, beginning